Which African American desserts have we let slip away? The ones no one makes anymore. They once filled kitchens, sweetened holidays, and tied families together. How did they fade so quietly from our lives? Tea cakes were once a symbol of comfort and togetherness, baked in African American kitchens for Sunday gatherings and holidays when families came together after church. These soft cookies were not overly sweet, but they carried just enough sugar and spice to make them memorable. The beauty of tea cakes was in their simplicity, made with flour, butter, sugar, and a touch of nutmeg or vanilla if the household could afford it. Children grew up expecting them on special days, and grandmothers often measured ingredients by hand without written recipes. They were as much about memory as they were about taste, each batch slightly different but always familiar. Some families passed down the tradition through oral instructions, while others guarded written versions in old cookbooks. The cookies were served with tea, coffee, or milk, and carried a softness that made them easy to love at any age. Today, they are rarely made outside of heritage cookbooks, but they remain a sweet reminder of togetherness. Losing them from our tables feels like losing a piece of family history, yet their memory lingers in stories told by elders who still remember the smell of them baking. Vinegar pie was one of those clever creations born out of necessity, especially during the Depression when ingredients like lemons were hard to find. African American families embraced it as a way to create something sweet and tangy when the pantry seemed bare. The filling used simple staples: sugar, butter, eggs, and a splash of vinegar to mimic the tartness of fruit pies. Baked in a flaky crust, the result was a custard-like dessert with a surprising flavor that balanced richness with tang. It became a common treat at Sunday tables and special occasions, showing how creativity could transform scarcity into something memorable. The pie symbolized resilience, proving that a lack of fancy ingredients did not mean going without dessert. It was also a way of teaching younger generations about resourcefulness, turning what little you had into something worth sharing. Though many people today may raise eyebrows at the thought of vinegar in a pie, those who remember it know it carried warmth and pride. It was not just about taste, but about making the best of hard times. Few pies capture that kind of story anymore, which makes vinegar pie truly unforgettable. Molasses stack cake was a showstopper at church socials, weddings, and community gatherings, yet it was built from simple ingredients stretched as far as possible. African American families baked thin layers of cake flavored with molasses, then stacked them high with a sweet spread of more molasses or sorghum between each. The cake was sometimes made communally, with each family contributing a layer to the stack before it was assembled. The result was a towering dessert that grew richer as it rested, the molasses soaking into the tender layers until it cut smooth and soft. It was not overly sugary, but instead carried the deep, earthy sweetness of molasses, a flavor tied closely to Southern kitchens. Eating a slice was as much about celebrating community as it was about enjoying dessert. The cake represented effort, pride, and togetherness, proving that even simple resources could create something grand. Over time, as boxed mixes and store-bought sweets became common, the molasses stack cake faded from daily life. Still, its memory remains as one of the most beloved but forgotten desserts, a reminder that food once brought entire communities together, one layer at a time. Caramel cake was once the centerpiece of Sunday dinners, a dessert that showed love, patience, and skill in every slice. The cake itself was soft and tender, but it was the icing that made it unforgettable. Homemade caramel frosting required time and attention, stirring sugar and butter until it transformed into a golden, rich glaze. African American families across the South often saved caramel cake for special occasions where it graced the table as a symbol of celebration. It was not a quick dessert, but one that demanded practice, steady hands, and a willingness to stand over the stove until the caramel reached perfection. The flavor was sweet, with a depth that no boxed mix could imitate, and the texture melted on the tongue with every bite. Children often begged for the first slice, and grandmothers proudly served it to guests as proof of their kitchen mastery. Over time, easier frostings and store-bought cakes took its place, but the memory of caramel cake still lingers for those who grew up with it. It was more than just dessert. It was a statement of love baked into every layer. Sweet potato cobbler was once a holiday tradition that filled kitchens with the scent of cinnamon, nutmeg, and butter. African-American families sliced thick rounds of sweet potato, layered them with sugar and spices, then covered them in pastry crust. As the cobbler baked, the potatoes softened into a rich custard-like filling, blending perfectly with the flaky crust. Unlike fruit cobblers, sweet potato cobbler carried a heartier, more earthy flavor that felt like home in every bite. It was often served at Christmas, Thanksgiving, and church gatherings, where it was greeted with smiles and second helpings. Families valued it not only for its taste, but also for its practicality, since sweet potatoes were easy to store and lasted through winter. The dish tied celebrations to the land, as many families grew their own sweet potatoes and used them proudly in desserts. Today, sweet potato pie may still be found on tables, but cobbler has largely disappeared from the holiday spread. Its absence is a reminder of how traditions fade, yet those who tasted it remember its warmth. Sweet potato cobbler was more than dessert, it was celebration baked into every golden crust. Cornmeal pound cake carried a rustic charm that made it stand out from other desserts. Instead of being light and delicate, this cake was hearty, dense, and textured thanks to the addition of cornmeal. African-American families often baked it in loaf pans or cast-iron skillets, serving thick slices with coffee or tea. The flavor was simple yet comforting, a blend of buttery richness with the earthy grit of cornmeal. It was especially common in rural communities where cornmeal was plentiful and inexpensive compared to refined flour. The cake kept well and could be enjoyed over several days, making it a practical choice for busy households. While it may not have had the glamour of frosted cakes or layered showpieces, cornmeal pound cake held its own as a dependable favorite. It was a dessert that spoke of resourcefulness, showing how everyday ingredients could become something worth savoring. Over time, it faded as boxed cakes took over, but its memory remains strong among those who knew its humble pleasure. Cornmeal pound cake may not appear on many modern tables, but it once stood as a proud and clever creation of African-American kitchens. Transparent pie was a specialty that once filled Black Southern kitchens, a simple but striking dessert with a history tied to Kentucky roots. Made from butter, eggs, sugar, and cream, it created a clear, custard-like filling that shone under its golden crust. African-American families made it for gatherings and church suppers where its sweetness satisfied without the need for expensive ingredients. The pie's simplicity made it accessible, but its glossy, translucent center gave it a touch of elegance that set it apart. It was a recipe passed down through generations, often remembered only by those who grew up watching their elders whisk the filling together. Transparent pie carried the essence of thrift, turning staples into something that looked far more impressive than it cost. Its taste was rich, smooth, and satisfying, a blend of creaminess and sweetness that lingered long after the last bite. Though it has nearly vanished from modern cookbooks and tables, transparent pie remains one of those hidden gems of the past. Remembering it is like opening a window into kitchens where cleverness and tradition created desserts that truly stood the test of time. Blackberry dumplings were a dessert born of foraging when families gathered berries from wild bushes that grew along fence lines and fields. African-American households turned these tart berries into something extraordinary by simmering them with sugar and dropping in spoonfuls of dough. The dumplings puffed up in the bubbling juices, creating a dish that was both filling and sweet. It was a summertime tradition, especially in the South, where children would pick blackberries with stained fingers before running them back to the kitchen. The dessert reflected a time when food came directly from the land, with little separation between gathering and eating. Served warm with cream or cold the next day, blackberry dumplings provided comfort and nourishment at once. They represented thrift, resourcefulness, and joy, all in one humble pot. While cobblers and crisps remain, dumplings have nearly disappeared from everyday tables, replaced by easier, faster recipes. Yet those who remember blackberry dumplings recall them with fondness, the tart berries balanced perfectly by soft dough. It was a dessert that tasted like summer itself, made sweeter because it came from effort, community, and the land. Potato candy may sound unusual, but it was once a beloved treat in African American households. Mashed potatoes were combined with powdered sugar until they formed a pliable dough. This mixture was then rolled out and spread with peanut butter before being rolled into logs and sliced into pinwheels. The candy was inexpensive to make and required no fancy ingredients, making it popular during lean times. Its flavor was surprisingly delightful, with the sweetness of sugar balanced by the richness of peanut butter. Children especially loved potato candy because it looked fun and felt like a reward even when resources were limited. It became a common recipe at holidays or family gatherings, where a plate of colorful slices stood proudly on the table. Though it may sound odd today, the candy was a testament to creativity and the ability to transform basic foods into something special. Potato candy was proof that ingenuity in the kitchen could create joy out of scarcity. While it is rarely made now, it remains one of those quirky and unforgettable recipes tied to heritage, memory, and the resourceful spirit of past generations. Coconut custard pie was once a staple at church potlucks and family reunions, where its creamy texture and tropical flavor stood out among other desserts. African American cooks blended eggs, milk, sugar, and shredded coconut to make a custard filling that baked into a golden, fragrant pie. The coconut added both sweetness and texture, turning a simple custard into something memorable. It was often served in generous slices, paired with coffee or sweet tea after a hearty meal. Coconut custard pie symbolized celebration, reminding everyone that even the simplest ingredients could feel indulgent when made with care. Families often guarded their recipes closely, adding small twists like nutmeg, lemon zest, or a splash of vanilla to make their version unique. Children often remembered it as the taste of church gatherings, where long tables were filled with home-baked desserts made with love. Today, coconut cream pies remain popular, but the custard version has nearly disappeared. Its absence leaves a quiet gap in cultural memory, even though it once stood proudly on countless tables. Coconut custard pie deserves to be remembered as one of the clever, cherished desserts no one makes anymore. Apple brown. Betty was one of those clever desserts that turned scraps into comfort, layering sliced apples with breadcrumbs, sugar, and warm spices. African American families often relied on it when ingredients were limited, making use of leftover bread that would have otherwise gone stale. Butter or drippings were dotted between the layers, and as it baked, the crumbs soaked up the spiced juices from the apples. The smell alone filled kitchens with a sense of warmth and home. It was a dish that could be prepared quickly, yet it always tasted like something special. Children loved it because it was sweet and soft, while adults valued it for its thrift and practicality. Often baked in cast-iron skillets, it carried the rustic charm of resourceful kitchens where nothing was wasted. It was served warm, sometimes with milk or cream poured over, stretching a few apples into dessert for the whole family. Though it rarely appears today, Apple Brown Betty was once a reminder of how ingenuity created lasting memories. Buttermilk pie was a simple yet rich creation that became a fixture at family gatherings and Sunday dinners. Made from basic staples like eggs, sugar, butter, and tangy buttermilk, it baked into a creamy custard filling with a lightly golden crust. African American households valued it for its reliability, since the ingredients were nearly always available in the pantry or fridge. The flavor was balanced, slightly tart, but mostly sweet, with a smooth texture that seemed fancier than its humble origins. Grandmothers often pulled one from the oven just before guests arrived, letting it cool on the table to signal celebration. Each family had their own small twist, sometimes adding lemon zest, nutmeg, or vanilla to deepen the flavor. Buttermilk pie was also practical because it kept well, allowing leftovers to be enjoyed for days. Served warm or chilled, it always carried a sense of comfort and tradition. Today, it has been overshadowed by flashier desserts, but its quiet richness tells the story of kitchens where love and thrift created something enduring. Chess pie was a sugary custard pie that once held pride of place in Southern kitchens, including many African American households. Its filling was made from butter, eggs, sugar, and cornmeal, which gave it a slightly grainy texture that set it apart from other pies. The result was a dense, sweet dessert with a caramel-like flavor that lingered on the tongue. Families appreciated it for its simplicity, since all the ingredients were affordable and shelf-stable, making it easy to whip up at a moment's notice. Chess pie was often baked for church suppers, holiday tables, and neighborhood gatherings, where a single pie could be sliced into small but satisfying portions. It represented the ingenuity of cooks who elevated plain ingredients into something beloved. Though recipes still exist in cookbooks, it has quietly faded from everyday tables, replaced by store-bought sweets. Those who remember it recall its sweetness with fondness, tied to voices of mothers and grandmothers serving it with pride. Chess pie was once more than dessert. It was heritage baked into every slice. Molasses cookies were the kind of treat that spoke of both scarcity and comfort, sweetened with molasses at times when refined sugar was too expensive or unavailable. African-American families leaned on them during hard years, blending flour, lard, or butter, spices, and molasses into a dough that baked into dark, fragrant rounds. The cookies were crisp at the edges, soft in the middle, and carried the rich depth of ginger, cinnamon, or nutmeg depending on what was on hand. Their aroma filled kitchens with warmth, especially in colder months when families gathered close. They were often packed into tins, lasting several days and serving as an affordable snack for children. Each bite carried a story of resilience, showing how cooks transformed limited resources into joy. Molasses cookies were also staples at community events, baked in batches for socials or fundraisers. Over time, as refined sugar became more accessible, the cookies slowly disappeared from regular baking. Yet they remained tied to memory, representing cleverness and the sweetness of making do. Banana pudding with meringue was once a favorite at family gatherings, layered with homemade custard, vanilla wafers, and sliced bananas, then crowned with fluffy meringue. African-American cooks elevated this dish by topping it with browned meringue rather than whipped cream, which gave it elegance without added expense. The custard was cooked slowly on the stove, thickened with eggs and milk until silky, then poured over layers of cookies and fruit. The meringue was whipped by hand until stiff, spread across the top, and baked just long enough to turn golden. Families valued it because it made a modest amount of bananas feed a crowd while still tasting indulgent. It was often served at church dinners, where its airy topping drew eyes before the first spoonful was taken. The pudding was sweet, creamy, and soft, with the crunch of cookies softened into the mix. Today, instant mixes have replaced the homemade versions, but they lack the patience and pride of the original. Banana pudding with meringue was once a centerpiece of gatherings, treasured for its taste and presentation. Rice pudding with raisins turned leftovers into comfort, proving that even yesterday's rice could become something special. African-American households baked rice with milk, eggs, sugar, and spices like cinnamon or nutmeg until it set into a soft custard. Raisins or dried fruit were often added for sweetness, making the dish feel richer than its simple ingredients suggested. The pudding was filling, affordable, and nourishing, providing both energy and warmth on lean days. Families often baked it in large pans so it could be reheated for breakfast, dessert, or a quick snack throughout the week. The smell of cinnamon and vanilla made kitchens feel cozy, while the golden top promised something satisfying underneath. It was not flashy, but it carried the taste of tradition and the comfort of thrift. Rice pudding with raisins also taught children not to waste food, showing them how yesterday's meal could be reborn as something new. Though it is rarely made today, it remains remembered as one of those clever recipes that kept families fed with both sweetness and practicality. Blackberry jam cake was a dense, spiced dessert that once filled African-American homes with its rich aroma. Made with cloves, cinnamon, and nutmeg, the cake was moistened with blackberry jam stirred right into the batter. It baked into a dark, fragrant loaf that sliced thick and tasted of both fruit and spice. Families prized it because it made use of homemade jam, often prepared from wild blackberries gathered in summer. This meant the dessert carried not only flavor, but also the memory of foraging and preserving. It was a cake served on special occasions, sometimes frosted but often left plain to let the jam speak for itself. The spices gave it depth, while the jam kept it moist for days, making it a practical choice in lean times. Blackberry jam cake represented tradition, resourcefulness, and the pleasure of stretching summer's harvest into winter. Though it has nearly vanished from tables today, it stands as one of those unforgettable creations that carried both history and heart in every bite. Oatmeal pie was a thrifty answer to shortages, especially when pecans were too expensive for families to afford. African-American cooks blended oats with sugar, eggs, and syrup, baking it into a pie that looked and tasted surprisingly close to pecan pie. The oats gave texture, while the syrup created a sweet, gooey filling beneath a golden crust. Families valued it because it allowed them to enjoy something rich and festive without the cost of nuts. Oatmeal pie was often baked for holidays or Sunday dinners, where it satisfied cravings for indulgence on a modest budget. It was also proof of kitchen ingenuity, showing how substitutes could create new traditions. The pie became tied to resourcefulness, reminding families that celebration did not depend on luxury. Served warm, it was comforting and filling, its sweetness softened by the heartiness of oats. Today it has slipped into obscurity, yet it remains a clever reminder of how African-American households created joy even in the hardest times. Shoofly pie was a molasses-rich dessert that entered African-American kitchens through Southern foodways and quickly became part of tradition. Its filling of molasses, brown sugar, and crumbs baked into a dense, sweet custard that carried both depth and energy. Molasses was affordable and widely available, making the pie a practical treat for families with limited means. The flavor was bold, not delicate, with a strong sweetness balanced by the crumb topping that baked into a crisp layer. Shoofly pie was often served in thick slices with coffee, making it a favorite for gatherings or late afternoon treats. Families appreciated it not only for its taste but also for its thrift, since molasses stretched further than refined sugar. Over time, it became less common as tastes shifted and store-bought desserts took over. Yet for those who remember it, Shoofly pie is tied to memory and heritage, carrying the richness of the past in every bite. It remains one of those clever recipes that deserves to be remembered. Peach ice cream made by hand was a summer joy, created outdoors with hand-crank freezers packed with ice and salt. African-American families gathered on porches or yards, taking turns turning the handle as the mixture churned slowly into frozen cream. Fresh peaches, peeled and mashed, were stirred into the custard base, giving the dessert its bright sweetness. The process took time and teamwork, but that was part of its magic. Children waited eagerly for the first scoop, often licking the paddles clean once the freezer was opened. The flavor was unmatched, fresher and richer than anything from a store. It was also an event, more than just dessert, since making it brought everyone together in laughter and effort. Peach ice cream was served at reunions, picnics, and summer holidays, where it cooled hot afternoons and created lasting memories. Today, machines and pre-made cartons have replaced the ritual, but they cannot replace the feeling. Hand-churned peach ice cream was more than food. It was family and tradition, spun into sweetness. Pineapple upside-down cake was once a mid-century showstopper, baked in cast-iron skillets where caramelized pineapple rings and bright red cherries created a jewel-like topping. African-American households often served it at celebrations, where its golden glaze and tropical flavor felt festive and indulgent. The cake batter was poured over the sugared fruit, then flipped once baked, revealing a glossy, sticky crown that made guests smile. It was practical too, since canned pineapple was inexpensive and easy to find, making it possible to prepare year-round. Families loved its cheerful appearance, the sweet fruit pairing perfectly with the soft cake beneath. Children often fought over the cherries, considering them the best part of the slice. Over time, as trends shifted to lighter desserts and packaged mixes, pineapple upside-down cake became less common on tables. Yet, for those who grew up with it, the cake remains a reminder of Sunday dinners, birthdays, and church socials where it always stole the spotlight. Its fading presence leaves behind not just a recipe, but a memory of joy baked into cast iron. Prune cake was a thrifty dessert that turned what many considered a humble ingredient into something rich and satisfying. African-American families stewed prunes until soft, then blended them into a spiced cake batter filled with cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves. The prunes gave the cake a deep sweetness and moist texture that lasted for days, making it perfect for large households or gatherings. It was served plain or dusted with powdered sugar, sometimes with a drizzle of simple icing when resources allowed. Prune cake was practical because prunes kept well in pantries and were affordable compared to fresh fruit. Families valued it not just for thrift but also for comfort, since its flavor carried warmth and familiarity. It was often baked during holidays or shared at church events, where its rich aroma filled kitchens with anticipation. Today, the cake is rarely seen, dismissed unfairly by modern tastes. Yet it was once beloved, a reminder that clever cooks could transform simple ingredients into something extraordinary. Prune cake stood as proof that desserts were about heart as much as luxury. Jelly roll cake was once a showpiece dessert that brought a sense of elegance to African-American households during special events. A thin sponge cake was baked, spread with homemade jam or jelly, and then carefully rolled into a spiral. When sliced, each piece revealed a swirl of color that made it look fancier than its simple ingredients suggested. Families often prepared it for birthdays, church socials, or Sunday dinners where presentation mattered as much as flavor. The rolling required skill, since the sponge could crack if not handled carefully, making it a dessert of both pride and patience. Homemade jams from summer fruits like blackberry or plum often filled the center, adding seasonal flavor. Children loved the slices because they looked almost too pretty to eat, while adults admired the careful work. Though jelly roll cakes have mostly disappeared from modern kitchens, they once represented creativity, thrift, and the joy of making something beautiful by hand. Its fading presence shows how desserts that once felt like artistry are often forgotten. Molasses pull candy was one of those family projects that turned kitchens into workshops, filling evenings with laughter and sticky hands. African-American families cooked molasses or sorghum with sugar until it reached the right stage, then poured it onto buttered pans to cool slightly. Once firm enough, the candy was pulled by hand, stretched, and folded repeatedly until it turned glossy and light. Children and adults alike took turns tugging at the strands, their arms tired but their spirits high. It was as much about the process as it was about the sweet reward, since the candy was shared at the end of the night. Its flavor was bold, rich with molasses, and far different from store-bought treats. Families cherished the memory of gathering together for the task, knowing that patience and teamwork made the candy possible. Though this tradition has nearly vanished, it once stood as a symbol of togetherness, creativity, and joy. Molasses pull candy was not just confection, it was experience made edible. Hummingbird cake was a dessert tied to African-American gatherings in the South, combining bananas, pineapple, and spices into a moist, flavorful cake. It was generously frosted with cream cheese icing, making it rich and indulgent without being overly complicated. The fruit gave the cake natural sweetness and kept it tender, while the spices added warmth. Families served it at reunions, weddings, and Sunday dinners, where it became a centerpiece dessert that drew compliments. Hummingbird cake was often passed around in large slices, meant to be shared and enjoyed together. Its popularity soared during the mid-20th century, but over time it has quietly faded from many kitchens. Though still remembered in Southern cookbooks, it rarely appears on modern tables, overshadowed by trendier desserts. Yet those who recall it know it carried a spirit of celebration, a cake that symbolized abundance and care. Hummingbird cake remains one of those recipes that tells a story of hospitality and joy, baked with both fruit and tradition. Water pie was one of the cleverest Depression-era inventions, proving dessert could still be made when cupboards were bare. African-American families mixed water, sugar, flour, and butter in a crust, baking until it thickened into a soft, custard-like filling. The taste was surprisingly sweet and creamy, making it feel like more than the sum of its parts. Families valued it not just for flavor, but for what it represented: resilience and resourcefulness in the hardest years. It showed that joy could be found even when money and supplies were scarce. Its simplicity made it accessible, a dessert almost anyone could prepare. Today, water pie has nearly disappeared, but it remains a reminder of how kitchens stretched every scrap to keep spirits lifted. For those who remember, it was more than a recipe. It was proof of hope baked into every slice, a clever way of turning almost nothing into comfort. Drop your sweetest memory in the comments, hit like if you're craving a slice, and subscribe so we can keep serving up forgotten treats together.